Welcome to the History of North America. I'm Mark Vinet. Between 1652 and 1674, England and the Netherlands fought 3 maritime wars on grounds of commercial and naval rivalry. The Third Anglo-Dutch War put the British colony of New York at risk in 1673. Let's travel back with Eric Yanis of the Other States of America podcast to continue learning more about this remarkable time in North American history.
In 1673, New York and New Jersey have been retaken. There is a New Netherland in the re-established Dutch colony. The population of New England, or the English Southern colonies, collectively or even in individual groups, far larger than what you will see in the middle colonies. And so inevitably, these larger English colonies who are neighboring New Netherland, they're going to come knocking, maybe peacefully or maybe with sword in hand. On August 13th, 2 representatives appear in New Orange from the Connecticut colony. Now these men request an audience with the Council of War. And to the surprise of the Dutch, the men have an extremely reasonable proposal, wherein Connecticut and New Netherland would renew the peace that they had formerly when New Netherland was run by Peter Stuyvesant, promising specifically that Connecticut would make no first move to war if New Netherland did not do the same. Remember, although their mother countries are at war with one another, colonies like Connecticut are under no obligation to mobilize and risk lives to reinvade New Netherland. They're expected not to carry on trade with New Netherland, certainly don't be friendly with them, but if Connecticut were to war with New Netherland, that would have to be an internal decision of the Connecticut government itself, or the confederacy that it belonged to, the United Colonies of New England. All in all, these Connecticut messengers had a pretty good deal to offer. However, Admirals Evertson and Banks, they requested that these terms be put into writing. And then the 2 diplomats said that they simply did not have the authority to create such a document for their colony. And so with some hemming and hawing, the 2 diplomats were forced to go away without any sort of resolution. Had the Dutch been a little less heavy-handed and just accepted the verbal agreement, maybe they could have slept a little better at night. But after this interaction, the New England question is thrown up into the air. Are they coming? Are they mobilizing? Do they like us? We don't know. These Dutch military men who are now trying to become administrators of a government tend to be heavy-handed when dealing with adversaries. And sometimes it doesn't really work to their best interest. Which brings us right into our next subject, because what was their interests? Evertson and Banks, anyway. They were never supposed to become statesmen and leaders and defenders of a colony placed smack dab in the middle of English North America. In fact, their superiors back home don't even know about this yet. While Evertson and Banks could spare Governor Colve a couple ships and a large number of the ground forces, it became clear that, as amazing as re-establishing New Netherland is, neither Evertson nor Banks had orders to do this. Their individual missions remained unfulfilled. And so it became clear to them that they had to leave New Netherland and head for the original agreed-upon target that they had in mind in the Caribbean, the fisheries around Newfoundland. As you can imagine, when news got out that Evertson and Banks would be departing soon and taking a fair number of the men and most of the ships with them, all of these newly minted local officials who had just handed over their villages to the Dutch became very concerned about the defense of the colony. Evertson and Banks responded by reassuring the people. They provided for a small garrison that would stay at Fort Willem Hendrik, and they already put in plans to improve the fortifications throughout the entire colony. Indeed, it appears at least the Dutch population were very sad to see these 2 admirals leave. As the days and weeks that followed would attest, Cornelis Evertson and Jacob Banks were increasingly viewed by the majority of the Dutch inhabitants of New York and even New Jersey and Delaware as liberating heroes. Surely, much of the population must have been at least a little scared and a little sad to see the men go. Evertson and Banks oversaw an almost flawless and orderly transition from its former administration to civil government in a traditional Dutch form, and without a drop of blood being shed. And so we'll have to say goodbye to Evertson and Banks, and moving into September of 1673, now it's just Governor Colve. You might be saying to yourself, what about Governor Lovelace, the New York governor? What happened to him? Well, eventually he does make it back to the colony he calls New York, only to quickly become prisoner of the Dutch. And when Banks and Evertson leave, they take Governor Lovelace with them. Also leaving around this time were a couple of little ships that carried letters from Banks and Evertson and from the prominent Dutchmen of former New Jersey and New York, letters that hopefully would make their way to the Netherlands. In these letters, it would explain that yes, New York and New Jersey have been retaken. There is a new Netherland. And also, here are all the business opportunities in the reestablished colony. In other words, this is why you should really fight to keep us. Remember, the old New Netherland was owned by the Dutch West India Company. This new Netherland, however, is not. The Netherlands don't even know that they have repossessed the territory, and Evertson and Banks knew that moving forward, somebody would have to take stewardship of this colony. Whether it be the Zealanders that sent out Evertson or the Hollanders that sent out Banks. And honestly, this is going to be a hard sell because it is well known that the Dutch West India Company didn't really make a lot of money off the New Netherland colony. Some years were more profitable, sometimes entire decades. But overall, with the swelling English population on the borders of New Netherland, you can see the Dutch bankers calculating the defense costs year to year. This was going to be a hard sell. Perhaps the most profitable enterprise of New York, New Jersey, and collectively New Netherland would be the fur trade. Diminishing in quantity throughout the decades, not quite as plentiful as it was in the 1640s, 1630s. Still a relatively large market for the New World. And no, the Dutchmen weren't going out and getting their own beaver furs. They were getting them from the Native Americans. And so the Council of War and Governor Colve were greatly relieved when in September of 1673, the Mohawk Native Americans came to New Orange in order to renew their covenant chain with the Dutch. The nearby Hackensack natives did the same. This meant that the furs would continue flowing without interruption. Seemingly good news all around. But that troublesome Connecticut colony that wouldn't put anything down in writing, rumors made their way back to Fort William-Henrick that a Connecticut agent was in eastern Long Island seeking to raise the local militias against the Dutch. Rather than go right for the geographic source of the rumor, Governor Colve decided to reinforce Fort William-Henrick and whip the men into shape. He's a smart guy, and he knows New York and New Jersey fell apart just by taking this one fort. It could just as easily be the undoing of New Netherland. For the men of the fort, he made a strict set of laws that all of them were to follow, and a very scheduled regimen throughout the day. And neglect of duty would be punishable by death. Hurting another soldier to the point where that other soldier drew blood, you lose your hand. After this point, he runs the fort more like a ship, something he probably would be more accustomed to. And then really all of New Netherland, rather than taking on the character of old New Netherland, gained a real military feel. Governor Colve wasn't going to be taken by surprise, and from the Hudson down to the Delaware, the people were instructed to always be on the ready for a potential invasion. Governor Colve saw that Delaware region as being so far away from his grasp that the area was vulnerable to invasion from the southern English colonies. He appoints a man by the name of Peter Ulrichs, a man who worked under Peter Stuyvesant in the former New Netherland, to the post of military commander over the Delaware. And within that, the Delaware would be split into 4 districts. And every 6th man within that district would be enlisted or drafted to help fix the fortifications along the river and build new fortifications. These individuals would be compensated through tax breaks. And Peter Ulrichs was given 10 to 12 soldiers to man at least 1 fort. And all in all, that bottom area of New Netherland would function as a colony within a colony, having far more organization and that middle level, whereas elsewhere, the local deputies would just report to the governor himself. And just like the buildup on the Delaware, New Orange itself would need some fixing up if it were to withstand an attack by the English. One drastic measure that Governor Colve took is that he demolished about 24 houses around Fort William Henrick, because these houses could be used to provide coverage for an invading army. Now, we can certainly take his word for this because he was the commander of the last invading army. Today, we would call the process eminent domain, but 24 or so people lost their homes, and they would be compensated, the governor planned to compensate them anyway, through export duties from furs, alcohol, and guns. And yes, New Orange itself had some reason to be cautious of their English neighbors. The Dutch, as it happens, had been seizing English ships off the coast. And when the Massachusetts government wrote to Governor Colve and told him to stop doing that, or else Massachusetts would commit itself to the recovery of the New York colony, Governor Colve ignored them. If you take in Governor Colve, the man, it seems that he genuinely was not intimidated by these colonials. They weren't professional soldiers. A lot of them had experience in colonial wars as leaders of militias, but it appears he thumbed his nose at them. In all things military, where he was a professional, these people were part-timers. Knowing that there were agitators throughout Long Island, especially in the English eastern section, Colve sent some agents out there in order to administer an oath of allegiance, face-to-face, and told his agents to write down the names of anyone who doesn't agree to take the oath. The agents don't find very much success. And just to illustrate this, one specific episode from Long Island occurred in late October of 1673. Governor Winthrop writes Colve condemning his threats to the English on Long Island. Colve responds, resolute and without apology, par for the course for Governor Colve, and blamed any troubles on the Connecticut agitators. He sends 3 agents by boat to Southold. On the way, they come across an English ship carrying 2 agents from the Connecticut colony. One of the agents is none other than John Winthrop Jr.'s own son, Fitzjohn Winthrop. The English ship is doing the opposite of what the Dutch ship is doing. Both are traveling to Long Island. Only the English ship, of course, is trying to secure the allegiance of the Eastern Long Islanders for the English. The explanations are scant. However, it appears that neither ship would really be able to capture the other, and they both eventually make it to Southold. The English make it there first, and when the Dutch get off the ships, they're greeted by the cavalry militia. Whereupon, reaching the shore, the Dutch are escorted to a private individual's house, wherein contained all of the prominent people of the town. The English agents, who had beaten them there and probably done some planning, stepped forward and asked the people of the town, who here renounces their allegiance to England? And of course, none of them stepped forward. Now, the Dutch agents asked who here remained loyal to the oaths that they had given to the States General. Again, no one stepped forward. Silence for both questions actually only confirmed the view of the English and denied the Dutch their authority. The Dutch then turned to one specific man of Southold who had previously sworn allegiance to the States General and asked him why he now no longer upholds his oath. He cited personal threats and ultimately said he wanted nothing to do with New Netherland. The Dutch agents were then escorted back to their ships, and the English agents from Connecticut informed them that they should probably stay out of eastern Long Island, at least stay out of the range of shot of any local militia. The English might not be invading Manhattan Island, but they are certainly drawing a line. Now, overseas, across the Atlantic Ocean, all those messages that were intending to find their way back to Zeeland or Holland, they were intercepted, either by the English or allies of the English. And by October 3rd, 1673, the clandestine information found in these letters intended for the Netherlands only betrayed their authors and revealed to the people of England that New York was no more and New Jersey was no more.
I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you're enjoying the ride.